Enormity of Hillary Clinton penetration into Russia, warned could topple U.S. government. By Sorcha Faal, July 10, 2017. What does it mean.com. A gravely toned Security Council report circulating in the Kremlin today states that President Putin was astonished and amazed after President Donald Trump methodically presented irrefutable evidence detailing how Hillary Clinton had penetrated the highest reaches of the Russian government, with his further stating that should all of this knowledge be told to the American people, it would, most certainly, topple the entire two-party government structure of the United States. With both President Putin and President Trump during their G20 meeting pledging to defy the tyranny of Russophobia sweeping across the U.S., the Kremlin, nevertheless, was stunned by Trump's mastery of the knowledge regarding the deep state coup d'etat ongoing against him, with Putin's press secretary Dmitry Peskov even stating, quote, "Accusations that Trump is somewhat incompetent or that he is a novice can be classified as delusional trash. Trump is not some simpleton. He has expert knowledge, is a very determined negotiator, and skillful at using his knowledge to put his position across." Firstly revealed to President Putin by President Trump were detailed documents showing how former President Bill Clinton in 2010 approached Russian investment bank Renaissance Capital with a scheme that would enable Russia's state atomic energy corporation Rosatom to acquire one of the world's largest uranium producers named Uranium-1, and that for their being made part of this scheme, Renaissance Capital paid former President Clinton a $500,000 bribe disguised as a speaking fee once their bid was made. At the center of this scheme would be then U.S. Secretary of State Hillary Clinton rapidly approving this sale because it involved 20% of America's proven uranium reserves and would therefore need American governmental approval, and that on 24 March 2010, Secretary Clinton herself traveled to Moscow to solidify with her publicly stating, quote, "Our goal is to help strengthen Russia." Rosatom's confidence in Secretary Clinton being able to keep her side of this scheme was due to her actions the year before, in 2009, when she successfully orchestrated a shadowy deal between the Russian state-owned Rostec defense firm and the Boeing company, and that Boeing paid her money laundering organization, called the largest in the world by U.S. Senator Tom Cotton, named the Clinton Foundation, nearly $5 million for accomplishing. True to her word, 4 months after Renaissance Capital paid former President Bill Clinton his $500,000 bribe, then Secretary of State Hillary Clinton approved Rosatom's takeover of Uranium-1, with her receiving for doing so $3.1 million in one payment and $2.3 million in a second payment from Uranium-1's chairman, Ian Telfer. Another $131.3 million from Ian Telfer's business partner Frank Giustra, and a further $145 million from other shareholders involved in this transaction. To compare how successfully this scheme was that while Secretary Clinton rushed through Rosatom's acquiring Uranium-1 in just 4 months, it took her over 2 years to approve the sale to the French government-controlled defense contractor Safran Group of the U.S. biometrics company L1, as neither of them paid her any bribes, but whose companies did not deal with a critical resource such as America's uranium deposits. Acting as Secretary Clinton's central conduit to Russia in masterminding these schemes was the former U.S. Democratic Senator John Breaux, who worked on Hillary Clinton's 2008 campaign when she ran for president, and who himself gained millions of dollars as an agent for Gazprom Bank GPB, who is Russia's third largest bank. Former U.S. Democratic Senator John Breaux is a central Clinton operative who's important to note, as in 2011, on behalf of Secretary Clinton, another scheme was enacted that involved John Podesta, who was the former chief of staff to President Bill Clinton, was a counselor to President Obama, and last year was Hillary Clinton's campaign chairman in her failed bid to become U.S. president. This John Podesta scheme involved a small American green energy company named Juul Unlimited, and that on 18 January of 11 announced that Podesta had been seated on their board of directors, and where he was joined 3 months later by senior Russian officials Anatoly Chubais and Ruben Vardanyan, both of whom had been appointed by President Putin to the Russian Economic Modernization Council. The critical importance of Juul Unlimited is that though this company claimed without evidence that it had developed a process to generate hydrocarbon-based fuel by combining non-fresh water, nutrients, cyanobacteria, carbon dioxide, and sunlight, its real purpose appears to have been a money laundering conduit to the Clinton Foundation from the Russian nanotechnology corporation, Rosnano, who, as far as can be ascertained, have flooded this small company with at least $35 million, with a substantial portion of that money going directly into the bank accounts of John Podesta. One of the most shocking documents presented to President Putin by President Trump regarding these Hillary Clinton schemes to corrupt the Russian government while enriching herself and her criminal allies was one detailing that she was receiving guidance on how best to accomplish her criminal acts from William Browder, who after the fall of the Soviet Union became the largest foreign investor in Russia, but in 2013 was sentenced by Russia in absentia to 9 years in prison for tax evasion and for falsely claiming tax breaks for hiring disabled persons. Hillary Clinton's joining with William Browder occurred immediately after her two successful schemes involving Uranium-1 and Juul Unlimited were being investigated by Russian authorities, and whom Secretary of Clinton used as a cover-up of her crimes to justify the passing in 2012 through the U.S. Congress of what is called the Magnitsky Act to impose sanctions on Russian citizens. Hillary Clinton's Magnitsky Act, this report does detail, is named after Sergei Magnitsky, who was a tax and legal consultant for William Browder's Hermitage Capital Management that looted the Russian treasury of $230 million in false tax deductions, and even though he died in custody before his trial, Magnitsky was, nevertheless, convicted of his crimes too. In their knowing of Hillary Clinton's many crimes in Russia and her growing association with the fugitive from justice William Browder, but also knowing of her plans to run for the U.S. presidency in 2016, the Obama regime in 2013 stunningly filed an indictment charging that Russian criminals, quote-unquote, had committed the crimes William Browder had already been convicted of, but that 2 months ago, 12 May, the U.S. government was forced to drop in exchange for $5.9 million with no wrongdoing admitted, and that the lead Russian attorney, Natalia Veselnitskaya, characterized as, quote, almost an apology from the U.S. government. Important to note about Natalia Veselnitskaya is that aside from being a former state prosecutor in the Moscow Oblast, she is the most knowledgeable legal authority on the crimes of William Browder, and who became so outraged at Hillary Clinton's pushing through the Magnitsky Acts to cover up her crime in Russia. She established in the U.S. a non-profit organization named the Human Rights Accountability Global Initiative Foundation that calls for the repeal of this law so that Russian children can once again be adopted by American parents. So feared by the Obama regime because of her knowledge of Hillary Clinton's crimes, though, Natalia Veselnitskaya was continually denied entrance into the U.S. by the Obama regime. But when a U.S. federal court ruled she could enter in order to defend her clients, The Obama regime had her detained for hours and humiliatingly strip-searched in London. Prior to her finally being able to reach the U.S., though, Natalia Veselnitskaya employed the services of Rinat Akhmetshin to register her nonprofit organization, who is a Russian-American citizen living in the U.S. for nearly 20 years, known as a Russian gun for hire, and whom veteran Washington, D.C. reporter Steve Levine stated about by saying, quote, "I call him skilled because though I am certain that they exist, I know of no Russian gun for hire who managed to run his campaign so successfully running circles around purportedly much more seasoned Washington hands." Upon Natalia Veselnitskaya arriving in the U.S. and meeting Rinat Akhmetshin in person, he stunningly revealed to her that both Hillary Clinton's presidential campaign and Democratic National Committee were nearly entirely being funded by Russia, and that so shocked her, she contacted the British-born music producer Rob Goldstone, who has close ties to President Trump, to initiate a meeting between her and the Trump campaign. Meeting with President Trump's eldest son, Donald Trump Jr., son-in-law Jared Kushner, and campaign chairman Paul Manafort. This meeting initiated by Natalia Veselnitskaya, without Kremlin knowledge, enabled her to detail this Clinton-DNC-Russia plot, and that President Trump assured President Putin the details of would shortly become reality in the U.S. press. Knowing that Natalia Veselnitskaya had informed the Trump campaign of Hillary Clinton's criminal collusion with certain powerful Russian entities, the warned fugitive William Browder struck back by claiming that Rinat Akhmetshin was a Russian counterintelligence officer working with a former Wall Street Journal reporter named Glenn Simpson, who is most infamously known as the founder of the shadowy organization known as Fusion GPS. Fusion GPS is a secretive, Washington, D.C.-based private espionage firm with a leftist client list whose main function is in destroying populist American political candidates, and who, in 2015, were hired by a major Republican donor to dig up dirt on Donald Trump. But as Trump ascended to the Republican nomination, this donor backed away from the project, with them then finding a Hillary Clinton supporter to continue the project. With Fusion GPS then being funded, in essence, by both the Clinton campaign and Obama regime, and a Trump victory looking more likely, they then hired a British MI6 agent named Christopher Steele to compile a fake Russia dossier on Trump that was then turned over to the FBI and used as the justification to begin tapping Trump's phone and emails. With the Kremlin in near total shock of the enormity of President Trump's shocking revelations regarding Hillary Clinton's vast crimes against both Russia and the United States, Trump's conviction that when the American people finally realize what has occurred, they could very well destroy their present government could very well occur, especially when viewed of the light of these peoples being continually lied to by their mainstream fake news media, telling them it was Trump who colluded with Russia, and that no evidence of this being so has ever been produced, and all claims of such a thing having already been completely exposed as the lies they are.